everyone. Welcome to the BASE OKR Summit Objectives and Key Results. I am Liz Prue, VP of Marketing here at BASE, and I'm going to be your MC for the day. We are so excited to host you all. I'm checking the comments right now. We have people from all over, Texas, Florida, Canada, Massachusetts, more Canada, more Texas. I love it. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. We always love to see where our community is based. And again, we're so thrilled to have you here today. And if you weren't able to catch our update this morning, we do have a slight scheduling update. So I wanted to let you know all about that before we kicked off for our first session. We unfortunately had one of our speakers fall ill. We are wishing a very speedy recovery. So we've shifted around the schedule a little bit. Starting here in just a minute, we'll have our 10:30 a.m. Eastern session, OKR overview and discussion, hosted by Olivia Kowalski of GetYourGuide. And then following that at 11:30, we are going to have OKRs from an executive company's perspective with Olivia, joined by Tim Whitmire, who's an OKR consultant and founder of CXN Advisory. And then at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, we're going to do a break and do some fun giveaways. If you were at our last summit, you're familiar with how that runs. It's super fun. And then we'll have our final session today at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to have BASE Customer Success Manager, Mallory Greer, show you how you can apply what you've learned today using BASE. And we've even built some custom templates for you, which is really, really exciting. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to drop those in the comments. We have our BASE team in the comments as well, so they can answer your questions. And if you have questions during our session here today that we're about to kick off, drop your questions in the comments. We'll be answering them on the fly, and we'll also have a dedicated Q&A time at the end. But we know lots of you will be taking notes and all of those fun things. So we will have resources for you that we're going to email out afterwards as well. Okay, who's ready to get started? Yay! Okay, so right now is the OKR overview and discussion session. And for those of you that are new to BASE, we are the first ever platform built for assistants. You can sign up for BASE at app.basehq.com. We have a free version, and of course we have a platform built for larger organizations as well. So we'll provide more information on that if you're interested. But what I'm really excited to do is to introduce you to our wonderful guest today, Olivia. Hello, Olivia. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Liz. I'm super happy and excited to be here.
We are absolutely thrilled to have you. And of course, Olivia is the EA to the CFO at GetYourGuide. She has over a decade of experience in C-level support and extensive knowledge in the OKR process, which we're going to dive into today. Olivia, I'll give you a minute just to say hello and provide any background you're wanting to share with those watching today.
Yes, I'm very happy to. So maybe first of all, it would make sense in terms of context to explain what GetYourGuide is doing. It's a tech company with almost 700 employees in the travel industry, and the headquarters are in Berlin. And we built a platform that gathers the best activities across the globe, all in one place. So we have an app and a homepage where you can book incredible experiences, tickets for attractions, guided tours for the modern traveler. More background regarding my role. I'm assisting the CFO of GetYourGuide, and he's overseeing the finance and legal teams in this organization. And in our company, every department is kind of covered by EA support. And in total, we are 5 executive assistants. Next to managing and prioritizing the time of my executive is I'm also working on employee engagement topics and driving efficiency and clarity for the department of the executive that I'm supporting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know we'll get into this in our discussion too, but I think it's exciting that you joined during all of the chaoticness of the last year as well, particularly at a travel company. So that'll be fun to chat about too. Yeah. Okay, everyone, we thought it would be beneficial for those of you that maybe weren't able to get to the prep work that we sent over to just give a brief couple-minute overview over OKRs and answer any questions that you have before we dive into what that process has been like for Olivia at GetYourGuide. And again, I will, excuse me, be providing these slides afterwards as well. So if you want to hold off on taking notes and participate in the chat, please feel free to do so. At its very basic level, which we'll get into a lot further in the next two sessions, OKRs, which stands for Objectives and Key Results, are a goal-setting process that connects intention and action. So it's an organization's core purpose. It encompasses its mission and its values. And the daily operations that keep the business running are the actions tied to those. And leadership executives are responsible for upholding these and creating these. And what we're going to dive into today is how assistants can really help support leaders as they walk through that journey. OKRs typically have 3 to 5 objectives for a given time period. Usually it's a quarter. Objectives often reflect a desired or aspirational outcome. They're not necessarily something that you should achieve 100%, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but we will dive into that. But what you really should achieve are those 3 to 5 key results that are tied to each objective. So that helps measures your progress to goal, your success, unearth things that maybe you should change or optimize as you're working towards these, just to give you a little bit of context. And I'd like to hear too in the comments how many of you have either currently are participating in this process or did in a past role, or at least familiar with this process. That'll help us too as we walk through the discussion here today. And lastly, OKRs are monitored and shared transparently to track progress, break down siloing across departments, which we'll chat about with Olivia today. I think it's been really interesting to hear how she works across different departments at GetYourGuide and tracking the business's OKRs. And really the most important thing is to meet organizational growth goals. They're really meant to help steer a focus, which is the most important thing. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Let's talk about, well, first I thought, Olivia, what we could do is dive into how this process started for you. And I know it was a little bit of a journey. So if you could walk us through that background and then we could dive into the nitty-gritty, that would be great.
Super happy to. So I was hired last year by the Chief of Staff of GetYourGuide. And the advantage that I had is that the Chief of Staff was in charge of the entire company OKR process and working very closely on strategy with the CEO and the COO. And so I had the advantage to learn firsthand from her and get more guidance on how to implement that process on a lower level. So she was basically managing this on the company level, on the high level executive, and we executive assistant kind of roll out this process in our orgs and departments. And there we also had to find different solutions because there wasn't it wasn't the case that every solution fits every team. So it was a process of collecting a lot of feedback and iterating on the process and changing also around this process and how to make best use of the OKRs within our department. So that was really good for me to have the former Chief of Staff at hand as my manager. And some of the things that our manager also did is before she was rolling out the process and communication globally, she let us take a look first and we could discuss and give final fine-tuning remarks and feedback on how to communicate that efficiently. So she was also using us as a feedback sparring partner for these kind of situations, and very helpful also in my growth. I still feel like I'm in a growing stage when it comes to OKRs. I think you can constantly educate yourself on this, on how to write them effectively, and how to set goals properly, and how to improve also department and global understanding of what the teams are doing and working on. And I think we executive assistants play there a crucial role because we can spot if things aren't expressed in a way that is, we call it plain language, that is important so everyone in the entire company has some kind of background and can understand what the OKRs mean and how they contribute to the overall business goals.
And I think it's so important too. A couple of things that you said really hit home, I think. And one, it's that the chief of staff leaned on you and your team of assistants in your expertise, which is communication and supporting what's most important to your executive and making sure that's distributed appropriately across teams and departments.
Yes, definitely. And the good thing is that our EAs, we always know our orgs very well and know how they work and what their priorities are. And so in that, we are the best person to support in this process as well. And also we can align and exchange our best practices in our team meetings and say, like, I did this and I tried out this and this worked very well and this didn't work very well. And we can learn from each other as well by trying out new things. And this is also typical of Get Your Guide culture, to kind of get outside of your comfort zone every day. And this is exactly what we're doing. And I think we're a crucial support in this process as well.
And I'm seeing a lot of folks in the comments too saying, I'm not sure how to insert myself into this area, or maybe my executive doesn't open this opportunity up for me to get involved. And you've been fortunate enough to have a chief of staff that said, hold on a minute, we need to get our team of assistants involved. What best practices or advice would you provide to those that want to start those conversations with their executive? Because it may just mean that the executive isn't aware that an assistant could be leveraged to help with this process, or even just help at a minimum with communicating updates and collecting the information they need in order to track their own progress, even if they already have a tracking system in place.
I think one advice that I can give other EAs out there, and I think this is one advice that actually I have from my executive that told me, don't be let perfect be the enemy of good. Just do it. It's important, just do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're here to learn all together. And the important part is collecting the feedback, and afterwards actually proactively contact main stakeholders and ask them how the process worked for them and what they think can improve this entire framework and what can we do, and gather ideas there and implement them and suggest them. So really be an active part in that role, and proactiveness is the key here. And yeah, don't be afraid to fail. You just have to try out new things, and this is the only way of learning and growing. And I think that the mindset is here the most important one.
I'd like to, before we dive into the cadence that you meet with other EAs and other departments, just do a quick recap for those in the comments. So OKRs, while there are definitely formal OKR processes, which we'll get into in more detail in the session following this with Olivia and Tim, but it can also just be an overall goal setting process. I see some of you in the comments here say you just call them growth talks, growth goals, overall company goals. And a lot of these practices can be applied to that. And particularly as it relates to an assistant, what we would love for you to learn here today is how to let your executive or executives know that you can assist in this process, whether it's collecting information, helping to distribute information, or just aligning yourself to what's most important to them. Because typically, if we're talking about OKRs or growth goals, whatever your company calls it, those are the most important things to your executive. That's what they're measured on. That's what's most important to grow the company. And so today, we'd like you to keep that mindset when we're talking about what we mean by OKRs. Laura on YouTube said we call it development conversations. Yeah, so whatever your company calls it, a lot of these practices can be applied to those processes. So Olivia, I think it's, I love how you and your teams, your cadence of syncing, how you've approached that in a way where it's not the same for every team. And that's because every team is measured differently, they function differently. So can you share a little bit about how you, in supporting finance and legal, how often you meet, and maybe how that compares to the sales team?
Okay, happy to. So in finance and legal, when I joined at the beginning, the process wasn't like entirely in place. There was some sort of tracking going on, but I saw that it wasn't filled very regularly. No one was really looking into it. So we started to work on that more closely. And For finance, a weekly cadence, for instance, on tracking OKRs didn't make sense. There is not significant progress within 1 week to actually report on. And we really wanted to have that balance between actually executing the OKRs and reporting on them. And we didn't want that reporting part to be overwhelming and creating too much of work. And I think this is also a good start for EAs that haven't worked with the OKR process to actually, think about the cadence and how often does it really make sense to meet, and support on tracking as well, and making sure the updates are there in time, and start small and then dig deeper into actually improving the whole system. And for finance, we decided to meet on a monthly cadence. That totally makes sense for us. There we can report in person, and people, KR owners, have the exposure to talk about their work. We enforce cross-team collaboration for that, and engage people and ask them to ask questions. So they learn also about the other teams, what they are doing, and maybe collaborate better. We want to create this environment of innovation, and therefore it's crucial to foster that cross-team communication. And this was particularly difficult in a remote setting as well. GetYourGuide hasn't been a remote company before, and the pandemic kind of forced us to it. So also a lot of technical skills, if you teach yourself on that, it's also very helpful. In that. In a sales team, for instance, I think there probably reporting on the KRs makes sense to make it more frequent, because in a week there can be a lot of changes and a high impact on the revenue goals of the company. So there it actually makes sense to meet more frequent. But once a month also was a little not enough, so we decided to keep at least an async, which means we kind of offline report on the status of our KRs. That also makes sense. So every 2 weeks we track on that, and once a month we will meet kind of on Zoom, or hopefully soon in person.
Awesome. And I've loved in our prior conversations about this, how it's always led to how this is how you make yourself as the assistant essential in this process, and supporting alignment in those trade-off discussions, knowing what to escalate to the C-level so you can be focused and sort out what's most successful is just, it's the main reason, but one of the reasons why an assistant can be so crucial to this process.
Yes, definitely.
I'm looking at some of the comments here. Some folks are using spreadsheets to track goals if you're in charge of actually tracking the goals, which again, that's in order to insert yourself in the process, it may not be as extensive as what Olivia and her team does in terms of tracking each key result specifically, cascading that through departments. But there are different ways, of course, that you can communicate these updates to your executive. I saw someone on Facebook said that they use their daily digest in Base, which is fantastic. At 1 p.m. today, we're going to walk through some of those templates so you can see that. And leverage those depending on how your company does this. But it really is crucial to insert yourself at least in those trade-off discussions, so you know how everything is progressing and how to succinctly update your executive and the rest of their team. So Olivia, how are you then, because this is of course just one facet of your role, you also have to support your executive in every other way, and this OKRs is just one part of this. So I'd love for you to share, one, how you're measured for success, particularly with this OKR process and tracking, and how that fits into your overall measurement of success in your role.
So I think it's important to note here that OKRs in general shouldn't actually influence performance, or shouldn't be like a performance measurement tool. Of course, what I'm measured against is maybe on the impact that I have on the business with the KRs I'm setting. So there you have to be very detailed, because just if you achieved a KR to 100%, it doesn't mean necessarily it is a great performance. And it's just one part. So I myself also set KRs in a a quarter sometimes, when it comes to this people engagement topics and what I can do to actually support the entire department, but as well as organizing the process and organizing the department and my executive itself. So this is not a performance measurement tool, but it's actually like the impact of my KRs, if I set them well, are the actual performance evaluation criteria then in the end. So yeah, that's an important note to make here.
And is that something that you, when you're tracking your own, I guess, your own progress to your own goals, is that something that you track and then present to your executive, or is it kind of left up to a one-on-one review with your executive? What does that look like?
So we have these monthly OKR meetings where I actually have to give an update to the entire department on where I stand with my KRs and what the progress and the impact is. We usually focus on significant wins that we have or any learnings that we can share, or I communicate if I have any blockers or I need some support, additional support from other team members on that to make that a success. This is how I use it then in the end. Yeah.
And what if, another thing with OKRs, which we'll dive into in the next session, guys, and we wanted to make sure we kind of gave an OKR 101 so you could see how Olivia spends her day-to-day with this, what the cadence looks like. In our session following this, we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. But I wanted to tease a little bit on the notion that because objectives are aspirational, and key results measure the progress of those, sometimes those can change. And that's because, you are so laser focused, and it's supposed to unearth other optimizations you should make or things that are working really, really well that maybe you should double down on. So when those changes come up, how do you and the assistants you work with, how do you change key results? Or have you ever changed an objective? Is that something that you kind of act on immediately, or is it, okay, in our next meeting we should talk about how to change this, or what does that look like?
So I haven't noticed yet that we ever changed an objective, but we did with key results, yeah. And that if that happens, that usually happens early in the cycle, and not like very in the end. And maybe it also happens sometimes that KRs are not achieved due to other priorities that come up in the business. The important part here is the communication and to explain why that is the case and what did you prioritize instead. And we now actually rolled out a process in actually changing KRs and have a process now for that. We didn't have before. So either they were just like marked as at risk, or this is something probably won't work out, or sometimes a new KR has been added, but that has been like clearly communicated before. So there isn't like a proper process for this yet, but we're just implementing that in the newest cycle, if they are. But maybe important note here, I think as EAs, we can also, I think important it is if we see that something is going wrong or something is not working well, to escalate quickly and to actually find a solution and not wait 1 month until the next OKR meeting is happening. I think this is something we have to act on, because this framework should be like the absolute focus of the department and the people that are working in that. And so yeah, and there I think we can use our skills in communication and alignment to maybe foster these trade-off discussions that have been made.
Absolutely. You've talked a little bit about how you still feel like you have a lot to learn, and that's because this process, that's kind of the goal of this process too, no pun intended, is to continue to learn. It's not that we've decided this and this is truth, but it's what we believe to be true and how we're going to get there. I'd love for you to share how this has helped you just in your role as an assistant, how it's helped you up-level the support you provide, what skills that you've found that maybe you need to refine or that have already been refined through this process. So that way we can chat a little bit about professional development and how this is, this up-levels your role as an assistant.
So I think one important thing here is business understanding, and I think this is like really, it feels like an endless journey for me as well. So you really have to, especially with all these different departments and the work they're doing. But I think stuff like know what an P&L is and how the work of the teams are affected in that, and having this also financial understanding and how that impacts that is quite important. And it really helps you to form this process better with business understanding, and that is fundamental. And I think we every assistant needs to dive more into business understanding in order to be a better support. And especially when it comes to OKRs, when you understand the business, you also have to understand the company objectives and the company key results that has been set, to see like how can we support on the department level to achieve these goals. And this really requires a deep business understanding. And there I'm constantly learning. And one thing that helped me in particular was like from day one, the chief of staff wanted us to attend OKR meetings and see what the C-level is discussing there in order for us to make a better job here.
Has there been, for the folks that maybe don't have a chief of staff to help guide them in the beginning of this process, what other resources would you recommend, whether it be an actual person, or is there a course you've come across, or where would you recommend people start?
So one thing that was handed into me very early was the Google OKR playbook, and I was like, here, read it. And that was my first start off, how I started in, and actually shadowing my executive on a lot of meetings as well, and really being exposed to context on the business, and that has been really helpful. And this is not happening from one day to another. You have to continuously doing that, and but it will get better over time, I promise.
Right. It's something new. It can be overwhelming a little bit, for sure.
But one more, actually, there's an OKR podcast that I listen to as well.
Oh, really?
Yes, I found that on Spotify, so I can also share that later on with you. And the episodes are very short. It's just 15 minutes, and with great interviews. And I found them also very helpful to get started with OKRs.
How has alignment with other departments helped you support your executive better? Like, were there things that were important to sales, for example, or how sales functioned that you maybe didn't know before this process? That were there any light bulb moments that was like, oh gosh, okay, so that's why we do this way. So it improved maybe the way that your departments work together, or the insight that you provided your executive?
That's a tough one.
I know for that one, I threw it at you. I'm sorry.
There has been definitely a lot of light bulb moments in this entire process for me, and learnings and understandings. I mean, first of all, one important thing is as well that we really try people to not use abbreviations everywhere, and too much of team-specific lingo, to really create that understanding. And I think with my lens, and also maybe in the beginning, especially with the lack of understanding of the business, I asked a lot of questions. I asked, what is this? Can someone explain me that? What does this stand for? And actually comment in the sheet as well, and ask questions. And if I had a minute to chat with someone that actually owns a certain KR, I ask questions about it. And only through asking questions you will learn. And this you really need to put some effort into it, I think. Mm-hmm. And get out there and be proactive and ask questions. What does this stand for? How does that play into the company OKR goals? I don't understand it. And it's totally okay to say, like, I don't understand this. But I think a lot of times we're a little shy to ask questions because we think they're so obvious for everyone. But what I learned now through the time is that I'm not alone in this, and that the majority of people have also some sort of gaps in understanding, and it's just sometimes not everyone speaks forward for it. And this is also something I want to work more on, because I understand how difficult it can be sometimes to follow, to create that more transparency. So one thing that I recently implemented in our OKR sheet is a context column. And I asked the teams to provide more context and documentation on what they're planning to do, and to give a little bit background on what they do, so people can also read a little bit more deeper if they're interested. And with that, improve their business understanding.
I love that, the context column. I've never heard of that, but it's so obvious because there are so many different lingos, like in marketing, we have 100 different things that we say all the time, that there really would be no reason someone else in any other, department or would know what that means or would need to, but it can create unnecessary misalignment or confusion. And I think the context column is great. So is lingo included in that, or what else? Or is it more clarification too on why certain initiatives are being done?
It's sometimes memos, like additional documentation on the projects that our team's doing, a deeper explanation of what that KR actually can do, and what the impact which impact is expected on that KR. And sometimes people just wrote like a few bullet points. This is related to this topic, or we work closely with that team on that. So cross-team dependencies is also something we make visual in our reportings. Which teams are supporting your KR, or are you the only owner of it?
And is that, and apologies if I misheard, so is to providing that context, is that something that the assistants themselves provide, or is it up to them to find the information to provide?
I put the responsibility on the either people managers or KR owners, because that's not always people managers that own KRs, and ask them to provide additional context on their KRs. And because we do that on a department level, so in this meeting we have legal teams, we have finance teams from all different types of areas. So not necessarily everyone is like deep into the work of the other team. Like if you compare a legal team to a finance IT system, that's a different world. So and everyone understands that they have to provide maybe a little bit more than just the key result itself, because it can be overwhelming, and the understanding can be lacking here. So provided. So it's the KR owners that provide context. I just asked them to provide that and created that column with the goal to improve the understanding amongst teams.
And when key result owners are being assigned, is that something that the assistants are a part of helping to do, as well as the executives? Like, do you provide your recommendation as far as, okay, from what I know about my department, I would suggest this person is responsible for this key result?
So what we do is that we actually don't do that top down. We ask everyone to contribute in some way, and so it's totally open. Everyone can actually be a KR owner. We have these drafting sessions always before the start of the quarter, where we look into what we want to do, and we do that on the people manager level, and then they decide often as well who should own that. And sometimes the teams itself bring their ideas to their managers, and they just put that in the sheet for their people. They bring great ideas on how to further foster that company goals.
That's great. We have just a few minutes left before we're going to take a short break before we bring Tim in for the second part of our session. But I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. I know there's about a 5 to 7 second lag on Facebook, so I'll give you a minute to drop your questions in, but please feel free to do that right now while it's just Olivia here. And I did see, I think someone found the podcast. Olivia, is it Measure What Matters by John Doerr? Is that the OKR podcast?
That's the playbook itself, right?
Oh, that's the playbook. Okay.
Yeah.
We dropped the playbook link. Okay. We'll find the podcast for you guys, and I'll include it in the recap email.
Definitely. I can take a look now. I have it in my Spotify and give you that.
And 15 minutes is nice too, because then you just have an easy, it's not too overwhelming, which sometimes OKRs can tend to feel.
That's totally true. I'm listening to it when I go for a quick walk and just, want to invest a little bit. So it's called the OKR podcast.
The OKR podcast. There it is, guys. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
We're being so succinct.
Very simple name. So I don't know how I forget this.
Hey, you have a lot to remember. You have a whole OKR process you're managing. Well, I give you guys a couple minutes to drop some questions in the comments. Just a reminder, we are going to, at 11:30 Eastern, so in about 15, 20 minutes here, we're going to bring Tim Whitmire on, and he actually consults companies on this. He's a bit of an OKR expert, and we're going to walk through why these are so important from an executive company's perspective, so that way we can further help everyone understand the significance of this process and how it relates to the leaders you support, and maybe get you thinking a little bit about specifically how this can relate to the person or persons you support, and get a little bit more drilled down. But if there are any questions that you have on just the basics of OKRs or what that process has been like for Olivia, feel free to drop them in the comments now. But we will continue this conversation in our next session, which I'm super excited about. And then, of course, following that, we'll do quick lunch break giveaways. We have some fun giveaways planned. And then at 1 p.m. Eastern, Mallory Greer, who's our wonderful customer success manager here at Base, is going to walk through some templates that you can use. So if there are any updated questions in the chat. Okay, we must have done a good job, Olivia. You did a great job. Everyone's an expert now. No questions. I love it. Well, okay, we're going to give everyone a short break. We will be back here. We found it. The OKR podcast by Deirdre Pecknod. I'm going to drop this in the chat for you guys. And you said this was on Spotify, Olivia?
Yes, Spotify.
I love it. Okay. All right, guys, we will see you back here in 15 minutes at 11:30 Eastern, and we will do an even deeper dive into this process. If you have any questions that come up before then too, save them. We'll answer them in the next session. But we're going to go ahead and close this out, and then we're going to, at the top of your feed, just refresh it at 11:30, and we'll see you and have you join us for our next session.